We're living in a time of finger pointing, and it's all over Ukraine and Russia. And this has all been because of what I can tell. If you look at from fiction, a term from fiction that was written by Orwell, you look at the disposal of discordant facts in order to back up an agenda. An Orwellian image basically making a comeback in the heated rhetoric that we hear every night on the news and the heated rhetoric we hear on Facebook or we read on Facebook. We see the criticism, the handling of the situation. It's gone all the way back to the time of Afghanistan, go all the way back to the time of other wars. But it just seems to me that there's always this memory hole. The memory hole where we forget what has happened in the past. And we always are surprised at how we wind up in such a bad future when we look at all of the mistakes that were made in a memory hole. And as I said before, 8 years ago, and here we are, in another memory hole. We had a memory hole with regard to why there was such a screw up with Afghanistan. We have a memory hole and a dozen of other sound bites that I could take all day showing that what we have going on here is a global attempt at basically creating a ecumenical government or a government that would be akin to the Roman Empire. And so when I say memory hole, I mean a cause to be forgotten. That's the extension of a memory hole. It's referring figuratively to a place where inconvenient information about the past is disposed of. I mean, that, like I said, that originated with George Orwell's 1984. The memory hole in George Orwell's novel is a chute through which historical documents would be sent for incineration. Winston Smith, of course, the main character, the protagonist, worked for the Ministry of Truth, and that required him to get rid of anything that ran afoul with state propaganda. There's a quote from the book that says, when one knew that any document was due for destruction, or even when one saw a scrap of waste paper lying about, it was an automatic action to lift the flap of the nearest memory hole and drop it in. When 1984 was published back in 1949, memory hole was basically entered into lexicon along with Big Brother, Doublethink, Newspeak. And so discerning readers recognize that Orwell modeled the fictional memory hole on the censorship practice that were under the Soviet Union, that were happening in the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. Everything that Orwell talks about is anything, is talking about what Stalin's regime was doing. And anything that Stalin did would be consigned to Orwell's memory hole. But after Stalin died, it was his turn to be edited out of official histories. Soviet communists dropped Stalin into the memory hole. Stalin's successor, Nikita Khrushchev, faced a similar public erasure when he was deposed. He was actually deposed in 1964. And so this phrase keeps on coming back, and things are memory holed when they disappear from the web, or they're memory holed when they disappear from the news. So memory holding is something that I think is more important to talk about right now with regard to what is happening here, because it seems to me that what the biggest memory holding is about when this war began and whether or not we're looking at a new form of Caesarism. Now, Vladimir Putin has carried out a major escalation in this conflict that I believe, and that I've said, has raged for 8 years at the cost of more than 14,000 lives so far. It began with this 2014 coup that ousted Ukraine's democratically elected government in Kiev, and in its place came a regime chosen not by the Ukrainian people, but by Washington, D.C. The coup government encouraged assaults on Ukraine's Russian-speaking population who took up arms to defend themselves with Moscow's support, and rather than pressure its client in Kiev to implement a negotiated settlement under the 2015 Minsk Accords, The United States is instead pouring weapons and military advisors to assist Ukraine's fascist-infused armed forces in the proxy war that it helped initiate. While now hailing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as a national hero, the United States has sided with far-right Ukrainian nationalists over the peace platform that Zelensky was elected on in 2019. So the policy of using Ukraine as a cannon fodder has actually accompanied a bid to incorporate it into NATO. Compounding the dangers of a hostile military alliance on Russia's borders, the United States has also methodically dismantled the Cold War-era arms control treaties that limited the arsenals of the world's two top nuclear powers. This is why it gets scary. Since the year 2000, Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly warned that U.S. policies in Ukraine and other former Soviet states were crossing Russian red lines and actually he kept saying over and over again that it would force a Russian reaction. After years of this escalation, Putin's warnings have been realized in the form of an illegal invasion that has placed the world in one of its most dangerous moments since the Second World War. And those are the facts. Those are the facts, and now we are seeing the aftermath of bad diplomacy. We keep hearing magic words like sovereignty and democracy, but this is far from anything that represents sovereignty or democracy. Sovereignty would not be a self-governing power, but a familiar governing by the state. Even that state would govern only the theory, and supreme power would be held by a leadership that, once again, has a familiarity to it. A very fascist familiarity to it. Some leaders and journalists would call it the New World Order, for lack of a better way of expressing the globalist empire. With countless amounts of people consistently perishing as a result of these horrific conflicts throughout history, why haven't more people denounced the very institutions that bring these armed atrocities into existence? Why don't we call it for what it is, and that is another move for the oligarchs to push their New World Order? Both sides are pushing a New World Order. It's just, what New World Order do you want to play with? None can supply or supplant our Constitution. And so why are so many people wanting to supplant it?